better. Okay. I can't do this here, I don't think. That's gonna be too loud. Oh, I'm broadcasting this live, so. Alright, I have to move this downstairs. Jeez, I'm not gonna have time to take that shower. I'm so disorganized, I apologize. Okay. Is that better? Everyone can hear me? Can everyone hear me? I'm definitely not taking that shower that I thought I was going to take. Test. I should sit down. And I will be right back in approximately 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, Can everybody hear me? I'm hoping everybody can hear me. Good lighting, good everything. I don't drink coffee, Kyle. I just had Dunkin' Donuts, and I'm tired. Okay. Just give me a minute or two. Again, I apologize. I'm so disoriented. I was gonna take a shower, but I didn't get around to that. So kind of disfigured, disorientated. Oh boy, it's gonna be fun. Okay. Yeah, I stepped on a donut. All right. Hopefully my USB comes up. Down the showers, yeah. Alright. Alright, it's 9 o'clock. I'll do great. Oh, thank you, George. Okay, so unlike other speakers that I've noticed, I will be actually paying attention to the chat room off and on. Hello, everybody. My name is Nick Ford. I'm going to be doing a talk about incremental agorism and its proper applications. I'm going to actually, I split this speech up, or talk up into a few different sections, and if anyone has any questions in between sections, I'll dedicate like a minute to that. And if anyone has any quick questions in between sections, I'll kind of just pause for a second and see if anyone has any questions, like really quick questions, not like anything deep or anything, but just really quick ones. I'm hoping to have like 15 minutes of Q&A. This talk should be approximately 30 minutes or so, but I'm hoping I can get a little bit higher than that. That's the last time I did it. Unfortunately, I was up late last night, so I didn't get a lot of sleep as it was. Okay, so I think I'm ready to start. Incremental Agorism and Proper Applications by Nick Ford. Section 1, Introduction. Just want to make sure I got everything right. I seem to be doing alright. Okay. The term agorism means a lot of things to many different people, as with any word. However, I suspect that the definitions I will use here shall suffice for watching this talk nonetheless. Despite disagreements among the terms that may arise, I shall use definitions from Samuel Edward Konkin III and some relatively new phrases and terminology. I shall also introduce what incrementalism means within the context of a social movement, and specifically in this talk, revolutionary activity. Finally, I shall attempt to synthesize these two concepts and offer some advice for myself and SEK3 of how to perhaps properly apply these concepts. I will then, of course, take questions for the last 15 minutes, regardless of where I am in the talk itself. Is it rattling? Sorry. Is it better? I can't hear it, so I don't know if it's better or not. Let me see what I'm. Actually, no, I don't want to do that because that'll be echo. All right, is it better now? Somebody tell me if it's better. I'm sorry, I'm fidgeting. Well, no one's telling me if it's better or not, so I don't know. Still there slightly? Duct tape it. Well, I don't think duct tape will work. Alright, sorry, I'm not sure how to fix it right now. Anyway. Just by the by, I pronounce agorism and agorist a bit different than other people do. This is because agora, the root word, means marketplace, and was originally pronounced like that. So I'm under the belief that adding the ism doesn't change the root word around. I know it's kind of silly, but I'm just explaining, I guess, why I say agorism like that instead of agorism. I know it makes agorism, anarchy, action a little bit less catchy, but I still say agorism instead of agorism. So anyway, section 2, a reintroduction to agorism. Agorism can be simply summed up in one phrase, which is revolutionary market anarchism. That is to say that That is to say that agorism is always under the larger umbrella of market anarchism, which is the idea that all services that the state performs should be subsumed by the marketplace. They should then be taken up by voluntary associations that arise naturally in this new pluralistic society. Agorism is a revolutionary theory because it advocates a total dissolution of the state and a reorientation and change in society. This revolution, however, does not require aggressive violence if done right. Aggressive violence, the key word, key phrase. If done right, that is, if a thing that will be discussed more later in this talk called counter-economics is consistently applied in a libertarian manner that is in line with the NAP, doesn't violate legitimate property lines or encourage oppression of any sort, then the only violence that should be needed in an agorist revolution is defensive violence. This revolution will be mainly done through counter-economics, though I myself advocate other means of subsuming the state with the marketplace, since I don't think it helps to only have one means of smashing the state. I'll discuss these methods later and how to perhaps apply them. It will also be done through counter and alternative institutions, which will be comprised of agorists, and will be done first underground until they gather enough momentum to go above ground and be protected by consumer demand, and counter institutions which act as defense mechanisms to the new agorist cadre. Agorists are consistent libertarians, both in theory and action, and agorism itself is a theory of examining the world around us through a revolutionary new kind of way. This new way of looking at the world makes us realize it's not liberalism versus socialism, capitalism versus communism, conservatism versus progressivism. It's simply the state versus you. Agorism is your best ideological ally, and the agorist is your best friend, and what you should always strive forward. I'm thankful for Brad Spangler for providing the definition of revolutionary market anarchism, which is provided on agorism.info. If you want to know more about the revolutionary theory of agorism, the New Libertarian Manifesto is recommended. And if you want to know about more of the theory and practice of agorism, the Agorist Primer is highly recommended. This is just basically a brief reintroduction to agorism for those who don't know. So I'm assuming the audience is unaware of what agorism is, so that's just a basic summary of what it is. So I doubt anyone has any questions. We should all be familiar with those terms and concepts, and I don't want to drag down the talk too much. So I'm going to keep going. An introduction to incrementalism within a revolutionary context. As we all probably know, revolutions are happening. They're happening all over the world, and they've happened many a time throughout history. My contention is the way and the reasons why agorism purports to be revolutionary to begin with is what differs the agorist revolution. First off, the methodology of agorism. Agorism goes about being revolutionary. The way it does that is not through aggressive violence, nor is it founded upon the assumption that there is such a thing as good government. This assumption has already recently been made in people in Egypt, and countless others have made this same mistake throughout history. On the contrary, agorists recognize the truth that there is in fact no such thing as a good band of criminals, as Lysander Spooner and other anarchists have called them. This band of criminals extorts people who present itself for so-called services that would be better served if they were gone, and so the agorist naturally rejects them under this light. Agorists instead seek to abolish the state and all other states. This is the greater goal for revolutions, and the agorists recognize this. I contend then that the agorists based on recognizing this must adopt a form of gradualism or incrementalism in their strategy. The incrementalism here comes from a process of spheres of human action and from moving from one sphere to the other. And the New Libertarian Manifesto, or NLM, as I will refer to it from the here on out, SEK3 says we must identify and examine our condition. As agorists, we have already done this and recognize statism as the poison to modern-day society. We then see radical, consistent libertarianism, or agorism, as the remedy for this hostile environment. From there, we must talk about what sort of strategy and action we will take. The agorists then recognizing that nothing less than a full revolution of the mind, the individual, the culture, and society at large will do to have a free society. The strategy must be counter-economics if agorism is to be seriously pushed and consistently applied in a libertarian manner. How then does counter-economics fit within this incremental approach to revolution? Before I continue, I'd like to talk briefly about what counter-economics is, seeing how it's such an important part of what agorism is itself, and we cannot discuss the strategy of revolution until we discuss the method and the strategy itself. Counter-economics is a practice of evading, disobeying, and undermining the state's authority in a peaceful manner, usually through illegal means. Actually, always through illegal means. It doesn't necessarily have to be consistently libertarian. but I will argue in this talk that it's better that way. How to do things in a consistently libertarian manner has already been explained: the NAP, property lines, reducing oppression, not adding to it, etc. The main principle of this activity, as Konkin said, is to, quote, to trade risk for profit, in Agorism Primer, page 46. The calculation of the risk and profit is, of course, based on your subjective value and no objective valuation of things. The subjective and objective valuation of things comes from Konkin's, the influence that Ludwig von Mises had on Konkin's work, and Mises's magnum opus, Human Action, and more broadly speaking, Austrian economics in general. A good way of minimizing risk and maximizing profits is to make sure you conceal your activities as best as reasonably possible. Now, a good example that Konkin offers of doing exactly this in an Agorism Primer, and he does it in the NLM, is truckers using radios to make sure they can go past the speed limit in order to minimize the risk and maximize the profit. Because if you're going faster, you can, if the speed limit's getting in your way and you can go faster without getting caught, then you'll be able to maximize the profit and minimize the risk of getting caught by the police, something like that. Not only that, but in doing so, they keep the trucks, assuming they keep the truck under control, these truckers are not harming anyone or violating property rights. So, incidentally, this could be considered not only a counter-economic activity, which it directly is, but incidentally, it could be considered a libertarian counter-economic activity to some extent, even though the truckers themselves are probably not libertarians, or may have libertarian leanings, but aren't that libertarian as consistent as they should be, is what I'm trying to say. Incrementalism itself is the opposite of Leonard Read's Liberty Button, which was also mentioned by Murray Rothbard and Why Do You Hate the State? That essay. This is because the agorists will most likely outright say that liberty cannot be won with buttons or any sort of sudden change. It must be done with time and with care. People sometimes consider, and even libertarians and anarchists within the movement, consider revolutions of all kinds hostile to liberty within the larger movement, because of the history of violent revolutions that just had one state replace the another. Clearly, these means, the violent means, are not consistent with libertarian ideology, or even if they were, they would eventually not be. And even if they could be, it has been proven over and over to not be effective. So no matter what way you slice it, violent revolutions are not very effective insofar as libertarianism is concerned, or consistent libertarianism, I should say. And the ends and means are never achieved, and the ends are never achieved either in all these violent revolutions that happen. Agorists, recognizing this, say that counter-economics, that is the free marketplace that is made up of voluntary and peaceful actions that defy or counter the state, economically speaking, by breaking laws and regulations and so forth. All of this should be built from the bottom up, not from the top down. It should start from the underground black markets, which are peaceful and consistently libertarian, as opposed to the red markets, where illegal goods are violently exchanged, and work its way above ground once it has enough traction then. Clearly, then, agorism already has incrementalism as a part of it. However, this should be made more explicit. I feel like agorists don't realize that incrementalism is an inherent part of what makes agorism what it is, and that's why the talk is just. That's why the talk is incremental agorism and its proper applications, not just agorism. I also want to say that Konkin made it clear in the NLM that counter-economics or a counter-economy does not mean anti-economics or anti-economy, any more than the counterculture of the hippies in the 60s meant being anti-culture. If anyone has any questions, just really quick questions, let me know, because I know I'm talking a little bit fast, and I just want to make sure I've got everything. Settled. So, if nobody has any questions, I'll move on to section 4. Gotta clear my throat. Alright, I'll move on to section 4 then. Incremental agorism. The key to ensuring agorism's success and consequently anarchism's success is to find the state's system punct, that is to say, its main weakness. I'm not sure if that's exactly how you pronounce it, but that's how I pronounce it. Kevin Carson talks about that in a C4SS article about the state system punct. The main weakness of the state is exactly supposed to be its main strength, the enforcement. If agorists can make the state's laws, etiquettes, regulations, restrictions, prohibitions, and so on unenforceable, then the law or what you may, or what you or what you see there in front of you may as well not even exist. A good example of this happening to a large extent, whether violently or non-violently speaking, was the attempt at prohibition of alcohol during the 1920s. During this time, most people just went underground, economically speaking, and managed to find drinks on the black market if they couldn't get it on the white market, where goods sanctioned. The white market is where goods sanctioned by the state are traded peacefully, generally speaking, but usually inefficiently compared to what they could be on the black market. This made the Volstead Act, the act that prohibited alcohol, practically worthless, and thus the system punk of the state was recognized and successfully subverted until the law was eventually just thrown out of the books because nobody even recognized it. And then the same can be said with the current war on drugs and many of the regulations on our life. And in fact, as Konkin said, to some extent then everybody is a counter-economist, and this is predictable from libertarian theory. Nearly every aspect of human action has a statist prohibition regulating or controlling it. New Libertarian Manifesto, page 16. Now, of course, there's a difference between participating in the counter-economy unknowingly, for to be an actual agorist and hence a consistent libertarian, and participate in the theory of agorism. You must knowingly defy the state for the purpose of abolishing it. Doing so to minimize it, or doing so just to better your own lot or some minority, is not the goal of agorism, and therefore is not a consistent application of it, from my perspective. The goal of agorism is to apply consistent libertarian theory with the action of counter-economics, and the agorist goal, therefore, is to consistently act for freedom, and as much as practically possible, in freedom. I got that definition of the agorist from Samuel Edward Konkin's an agorist primer, where he talks about that early in the book, I think. And there are more steps than just addressing the system punks of the state, though. And while this is a necessary condition, addressing the system punk of the state, that is a necessary condition, I would say that by itself it is not a sufficient condition for a total liberation of the individual, or again, as much as practical within reality once the state is abolished. Incrementalism addresses many of the problems that anarchists faced when some of them tried violent insurrectionary anarchism with firebombs, explosives, and assassinations. In effect, these efforts not only demonized anarchism more than it normally was demonized already by the media, and more than what was necessary for them just believing in anarchism itself, but also broke alliances, and furthermore was one of the leading contributors, in my opinion, to breaking up the early 20th century anarchist movement. And where insurrectionary anarchism went wrong, incrementalism seeks to rectify this, but by realizing that the state cannot simply be abolished and our problems solved. This is so because the state is an idea. It is more than just an institution. It is an idea. And as I know it's kind of cliche to quote the V for Vendetta, but seeing how much libertarians do it, but as V said, ideas are bulletproof. And whether we as anarchists like it or not, it is an idea which has a lot of support in contemporary society, and most contemporary societies in the world. So if we want to do a good deal of damage to the state, we must make sure people not only are being disobedient effectively, but for the right reasons. In other words, they recognize the legitimacy of the individual over the state, and that the state has no place in society after all is said and done. If it is instead done for profit or some sort of sensualist notion, then the idea of the state will soon be replaced by a new one. Think of basically the Russian Tsar. Think of the Russian Tsar being replaced by the oppression of the proletariat or something, because the communists didn't actually get rid of the idea of the state. It was just another different form of the state, basically. This trading of one state to another has constantly been the case throughout history, whether that's in Africa, America, France, Britain, Cuba, and many more places. The key then is to make sure the obedience is gotten rid of to illegitimate power sources in society. And because obedience can be gotten rid of in numerous ways, the agorists then should seek this end through many means. I also want to point out that Etienne Laboitiette, and of course I'm going to butcher that name probably worse than George did, talked about disobedience in The Politics of Disobedience. Or the title, something like that. But I'm kind of giving a reference to that essay right there, and talking about what Etienne talks about. So anyway, one such means of getting rid of the obedience to the state and making the state's enforcement practically useless, two very important details if we as anarchists want to, in the long run, win win the fight and smash the state. And make the state only existing in name, and in the end not existing at all, contrary to the minarchists and reformists, are two of the most important things. These activities both do something that the agorist, as a consistent libertarian, should always be cognizant of. That is, delegitimizing the state and its numerous alphabet soup of agencies that aid in its aggression and theft. Everything from the DAA to the DSS to the DCF to the whatever. Some valuable tactics delegitimize the state and its agencies rely on counter-economics, self and external education, peaceful direct action of various sorts, and more. For now, however, I believe it behooves us to cover these three strategies since I'm limited in time, and I'm limited in time and I can only talk about so much. So I want to talk about my personal three favorites: counter-economics, self and external education, peaceful direct action of various sorts, and of course there's other things too. I'm not just saying that's it. Much has already been said about counter-economics and its role in Agorism and Incremental Agorism. For further reading on counter-economics and how it can be applied, like I already said, an Agorist primer by SEK3 is recommended for a more comprehensive look. Some shorter looks at how they've been applied were spelled out by Konkin and the NLM, but first must be pointed out not to worry taking the endeavor slowly. This is because some agorists may want to take the purist approach, in that they want to start up a peaceful and voluntary black association selling illegal goods to counter the state and have alternatives for these goods. This is a wonderful endeavor, but it can be stressed. But it cannot be stressed enough that this activity should not be rushed, and here's where the incrementalism comes into play. For black market affairs are dangerous, and perhaps even more so, depending on the area, than when Konkin first wrote the NLM. Even so, the agorist should feel no shame in starting out with a small side project that can only have some elements of counter-economics involved. I know some friends who are big fans of. I know some friends who are big fans of Agorism and are agorists, and they started out doing side projects, and for most of their life probably have been doing that too. There's really no shame in doing that. It cannot be expected that one can go from having little capital to much. One must take baby steps toward the final goal, and only when enough groundwork has been set for oneself can they make leaps forward. Think of the Henry David Thoreau quote, you can't build your castles in the sky, or something like that. You need the groundwork first before you can build anything at all. It is simply not practical to start off with a completely black market affair unless one has extensive knowledge of the black marketplace. And even then, it may be best to start off slowly to make sure that that more profit, believe that more profit than risk is involved, to make sure that more profit than risk is involved. This first principle of counter-economics cannot be ignored. That is, that there should be more profit than risk involved in what you're trying to do to counter the state. And of course, what risks are involved depends on your situation. It depends on whether you have a family, whether you're endangering yourself, who you're endangering by countering the state, what you're doing, etc. The efforts of the agorists may very well go to waste, and not only if the principle is ignored, and not only that, but more of the economy's possible resources will go to waste in the end. Now, all this being said, some examples of counter-economics being something of a success come from the Soviet Union. Now, I know Darian in his talk talked about how counter-economics may have aided in the end of the Soviet Union, but it didn't end it. And I actually was planning to talk a little bit about that, not much, but not extensively or anything, but I was going to mention that a big part of the Soviet Union's counter-economic economy was the black market, and of course the red market too. But I'll get into the reason why that's actually not as important as some people make it, though. Counter-economic, to some extent, the first world back in the 80s had a lot of black market economics going on, such as the Soviet Union when the NLM was written, and today, especially in modern-day Greece, and probably a lot of the African countries that are revolting. Counter-economic activity is certainly prevalent when it comes to avoiding and evading taxes, and Agora should try to find these people, if possible, and see if they would like to take its steps forward in a more consistently libertarian manner. So this is basically just an idea for an alliance. Agorists aligning themselves with Agorists aligning themselves with tax resistors. Agorists should always keep in mind, however, that just because they're not paying taxes does not mean that they do not have some sort of political agenda or that they oppose the state in any meaningful way. They might still report you, they still might report your activity. Still, this alliance of the tax resistors and agorists seems like a good fit and perhaps an easy one to see in certain respects. And in this light, the agorists should go for it, or go for alliances with tax resistors when it is most practical. But it is also highly beneficial to be careful and not to make too many assumptions about the tax resistor. Other examples, such as the truck drivers using radios to go past the speed limit, have already been provided as a thing done not only when Konkin wrote the NLM, but also in the modern day world. And if anything, it's probably more possible in the modern day world. Another tactic is countering what Konkin called the court intellectuals, which are basically what he called the higher-ups, main people, to instill propaganda into the people, or basically to propagate lies and falsehoods of the system in place. This is why education, both self and external, is so important. I consider it so important because both can act as the counter and alternative institutions in the counter economy, and it can be a sort of alternative or counter education. And the form that this can take for agorists is a sort of alternative or counter education associations made up of agorists, freethinkers, homeschoolers, unschoolers, and so on. These associations could provide schooling on a market basis, perhaps slightly white, perhaps gray, perhaps all black. It depends on, again, the risk for profit idea that Konkin had. These types of associations would be good. Also, pamphleting on the streets, distributing leaflets at events or important rallies, speaking out, and even blogging to a certain extent. And even this is can be effective means of communication. I know when Gary Chartier was talking about personal style and activism, he was saying that that doing a YouTube video and doing this kind of stuff may not be as effective as having strong bonds and stuff like that. But they can still be important. If there's any noise in the background, by the way, I apologize. I'm in a common room right now, and so there may be noise. Okay, so all these things counter the sort of court intellectualism that is heavily on display in the name of the state's violation of people's autonomy and property, where these court intellectuals mystify and try to confuse people, is where we as libertarians shall try to clarify the issue. And this will help people see who the real enemy is, which is one of the first crucial steps in understanding our enemy, the state. Of course, I got that, most libertarians will probably know, I got that term from Albert J. Nock's famous essay, Our Enemy, the State. I'd also like to recommend, if people want to understand the state better, if they don't already, The Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard is a good read. You can find that online. And you can also find The State by Franz Oppenheimer, which goes over the history of the state. The wonderful anarchist without adjectives and feminist Voltairine de Cleyre was not only an inspirational person, poet, thinker, and writer, but she also has what is regarded sometimes as a classic essay on what direct action is and is not, and that can be found online. De Cleyre said that every person who ever thought he had a right to assert and went boldly and asserted it himself or jointly with others that shared his convictions was a direct actionist. She then provides an example of this principle in action. Some 30 years ago, I recall that the Salvation Army was vigorously practicing direct action in the maintenance of the freedom of its members to speak, assemble, and pray. Over and over they were arrested, fined, and imprisoned, but they kept right on singing, praying, and marching, until they finally compelled their persecutors to let them alone. And so, just in the same respect that everyone does counter-economics, everyone also does some form of means of direct action at the same time. In fact, one could say that, and I believe I got this idea from a friend of mine, so don't credit me with this perhaps new phrasing of things. But counter-economics, or on the larger whole, agorism itself, could be seen as a form of economic direct action for anarchists. Now, as I advocate peaceful direct action, and so does de Cleyre, I'd like to make it as clear as possible that de Cleyre does here, that this does not necessitate pacifism. For as she says, those who by the essence of their belief are committed to direct action only are, just who? Why, the non-resistants, precisely those who do not believe in violence at all. Now, do not make the mistake of inferring that I say direct action means non-resistance, not by any means. Direct action may be the extreme of violence, or may be as peaceful as the waters of the brook of Shiola that goes softly. What I say is that the real non-resistance can believe in direct action only, never in political action. The basis of all political action is coercion. Even when the state does good things, it finally rests on a club, or a gun, or a prison for its power to carry them through. Direct action, however, to be more consistent and more effective, as I've already discussed, inadvertently actually, in discussing insurrectionary anarchism, should be peaceful and not violent, except in self-defense. I see strikes, slowdowns, sabotage to some extent, general disobedience to unjust laws, and more as valid forms of peaceful direct action. But declares natural antipathy, I think that's how you pronounce the word, antipathy, to political action stands in line with the Agorist, and so her conception of what direct action constitutes is therefore very much in line with what Agorists see as appropriate action. That appropriate action, of course, tends to be outside the system activism, which, while some libertarians may see as hostile to liberty, is perfectly in line for those who apply the NAP and other considerations of property and social relations consistently. For if we want to build a system outside of the existing one, it does us no good to take over the one that already exists, if we can simply, as the Wadley said, build a new society within the shell of the old. And as far as education is concerned, organizations like the Center for a Stateless Society, or C4SS, are trying to build a new brain within the skull of the old, which I have to say is just an awesome tagline. Just want to pause for a second. Okay, I'm good. These strategies, alliances, counter and alternative institutions bring me to my few final points of this talk. Namely, why hasn't the counter-economy already subsumed the state if it has so many successes throughout history? The Soviet Union, it's popular in some respects in today's economy. And how can you specifically apply incremental agorism to life? Obviously, your life or people you care about or whatever. These last issues are matters of high importance within the theory of agorism and this new but familiar term, incremental agorism, which, when all is said and done, is just agorism and how it should be done. Anyway, I'm also going to, once I'm done finishing my talk, I will address two quick questions about anarchism, and Kelsey was asking a question in the chat room about whether Christians can be anarchists, and actually Voltaire de Cleyre had a good quote about that, and I'll see if I can quote it off the top of my head, because I don't want to go upstairs to get the book that I have that has that quote in it and be looking around for it. Also, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I neglected to kind of do any formal introduction because I was rushing, so thanks everybody for tuning in. Yeah, we got about like 38 people, so I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, guys. And thanks a lot, George, for putting this on. So anyway, besides that sudden little break, the first question, which I'll go back to, why hasn't the counter-economy already subsumed the state if it has so many successes in history and seemingly fewer rules? Now, the first question is quite valid and is a point that Konkin raises, or mentions at the very least. The first question appears in both NLM and in an Agorist primer. Why, with all this insight into economics mostly provided by the Austrian School of Economics and rehashed in a new, radical way by Konkin in some respects, how have people not accepted this yet? With all the knowledge of the black market in the Soviet Union when it was around, and first world countries then and now using it, why has agorism not succeeded? I want to try to answer that question. I'm not going to say I'm going to blow your minds and give a fantastic answer that no one's ever thought of, but I'm going to do my best. So the answer to these questions return us to some of the basic principles of agorism. That is, for it to be effectively applied, it must be consistently applied in a libertarian manner and done with libertarian ends and means. The people who did these actions in the countries like the Soviet Union, Greece, and other places did not do it for the purposes that agorists would do, but generally did it to survive. And this is kind of a point I think Darian brought up, that the people who did the counter-economics in the Soviet Union may have aided to the state's destruction, but that really wasn't their intention. That happened incidentally, but their intention was to freaking survive. It really didn't have to do with bringing down the state. I mean, maybe for some people, but I think by and large it was more about surviving. because counter-economics cannot be applied correctly any other way than consistently. Perhaps if we apply it more consistently, then we will actually get the results. Now, counter-economics may inherently undermine the state, which may, but if the purpose isn't actually towards abolishing the state, but just surviving in a failing or failed state, then once the people have started to be able to survive better and live, they go over to the white market, making the black market only feel temporary short-term benefits. So, in other words, this kind of counter-economics is not sustainable, nor is it actually based on any principles. And so that's an important part of agorism. Now, of course, this is not the only problem here. Another problem is that the model outlined by Konkin determined whether a counter-economic is worth it, risk versus reward, or risk versus profit, tends to not apply to people oftentimes due to a monetary constraint or a lack of applicability in their life, or so on and so forth. This problem should be to make it more. The answer should be to make it more in people's self-interest to practice counter-economics and apply the libertarian theory in a more consistent manner. Again, agorism has to be consistent libertarian theory and action. The key to achieving this is to make sure people understand the principles behind the actions and how to do the actions successfully, and this must be done by already successful agorists or people who are generally entrepreneurs in the white market with some libertarian inclinations or theory behind them. I'm doing pretty good on time, actually. The up-and-coming agorists can learn from those who succeed currently in the white market, just like the individual in the white market who eventually should be in the black market will eventually learn from them. The main factor then is education. Now, some contend that the theory of agorism, because of the application issues, in some form or another, are elitist, or only for a small section of the population. Now, the fallacy here, however, is assuming that people who have no libertarian ends or means in mind cannot do counter-economic economic activity, or would somehow be excluded. Now, perhaps this would be true to some extent when revolutionary things like trying to subsume the state or making that big final push, that would apply, but as Konkin said, at every level, everyone is doing counter-economics. And furthermore, it would make no sense to refuse people just because they're not as libertarian as us. Furthermore, agorists should not waste time indulging in the no true Scotsman fallacy. If you don't know that, look it up, it's on Wikipedia. It does us no good to look down on potential allies or refuse them because of some imperfections. After all, agorism, as Konkin said, is a very scientific theory, in that it is constantly open to rejection and approval of old and new ideas. It is in point of fact a very open system that does not require any sort of populism, nor elitism, or unnecessary exclusionism. Hopefully, that's the hope. But at the same time, without this libertarian consciousness and eventually consistent, aka agorist conception, and consistent here, by the way, is and was not ever meant to imply perfection. So I'm not saying you have to be perfect to be an agorist. The actions eventually become meaningless, and it does not in the end smash the state, but may instead inform the people working to enforce the laws from some people who have not retained the libertarian ideas, and they will betray the movement. A cautionary golden medium is then highly recommended and probably required for agorists. Now, the last issue I'd like to address here, and I'm going to have one last section after this, and I'll be done, is how to specifically apply agorism, and more specifically incremental agorism, to your own life. Now, sadly, I'm going to give kind of a cop-out. Just like Konkin said, I've given you the framework and many ideas to go along with it. It's up to you as the individual actor to decide where to take their own projects and associations. I can give no universal help that will apply to all aspiring agorists or even aspiring libertarians or what have you. I myself am much more of a theoretical person than a practical one, and knowing myself as such, I'd feel pretty bad if I even attempted to give advice on something that I more ideologically support right now than practically support in my own life currently. I mean, right, like I'm giving a talk about agorism. I'm not going out there and doing it, or at least not as much as I wish I could be. But then that's the beauty of incremental agorism itself. I don't have to start supporting the counter economy now or in the next 20 years, but when I'm ready. Like I said, system punked was Kevin Carson was the inspiration for me using this term. I think Kyle Bennett made the point that other people use that term as well. Thanks to point that out. I may have looked that person up. Konkin made the point in the Agorist Primer that agorism was meant to improve the lot of everyone. not a chosen elite or unwashed underclass. So what he's basically thinking of is conservatism and progressivism, or whatever you want to call it. The Politics of Obedience, the Discourse of Voluntary Servitude by Etienne de la Boétie, is a recommended read on the subject of why people obey the state. Now I want to kind of explain for a second what Konkin explains in the Agorist Primer, and why going along with regulations isn't always necessarily a terrible thing, or it may just be unavoidable. Consider a particularly pathological case in the USA, or United States of America. He says that if you charge a price for your product higher than your competitors, this is taken as evidence under the Sherman Antitrust Act that you have a monopoly, and charges may be brought against you. The same problem arises if you charge the same. That is considered evidence of a cartel, and you and competitors can all be fined. Finally, if you charge less than your competitors, you are violating the fair trade laws in most states and can be arrested and fined. It is impossible to obey all regulations. And so the point of quoting this is to say that you shouldn't really feel bad if we're not basically denying, or if we're not defying all regulations. It's not necessarily a terrible thing. It's very hard to get through a lot of regulations, or even a few here and there. I'd also like to mention something that's kind of important within Agorist theory, the phases. Basically, there are different phases for, and Konkin talks about, I just forgot, I put all this stuff, a New Libertarian Manifesto. This is one copy, it's kind of beat up, but he talks about phases of society. And I would say right now in society we're at least in phase 1 or 1.5, which basically means, and if I can find it, yeah, phase 1 is a low density Agorist society, which is basically where we are. Yeah, basically there are small collectives in society formed of Agorists. And so I'd like to say that we're in phase 1 or 1.5 due to all the alliances that are going on, Alliance of the Libertarian Left, C4SS, the organizations, the temporary autonomous zones, such as PorcFest perhaps, and the Agorists that have shown up to this very event. Section 5, conclusion. And I apologize if I talk too fast. I'm going to address 3 things once I finish. What an anarchist is, whether an anarchist can be a Christian, and what does it mean if someone is off and on the books. To completely finish off, I'd like to tell a little anecdote from a friend who knows Agorism very well, and in fact introduced me to it and what Agorism is to him, and what it's become to me. This good friend of mine, this is a very short story, had a very successful side project going on that was somewhat counter-economy based, and he was doing well with it. However, troubles came when he started having health problems and he couldn't maintain the side projects. Not only that, but he's still having many difficulties in his life, even now. Now, the point of telling this very, very short story is to illustrate a fundamental point. Now, yes, Agorism can be successful, but make sure you're ready for that success, and make sure you're ready for those risks. Make sure you're ready for profit. Make sure you're ready for the decisions you're going to make. My friend here that I'm talking about was ready for both, but life still tossed him a curveball, which knocks the whole